these are 20 of the most brutal tackles in football history, and as this video progresses, the tackles just get more and more dangerous. Starting off at number 20, with a very recent incident because Jamal Musiala almost had his career ended with this one. It happened at the Club World Cup, a tournament many described as pointless, where top players just risked injury for the next season. And in the case of Jamal Musiala, they were right. Bayern Munich's young superstar was playing in the quarterfinal against Paris Saint-Germain, where he was battling with William Pacho to try to keep the ball in play until PSG goalkeeper Gianluigi Donnarumma hurled out of his goal and caught Musiala's feet, twisting his ankle so far that not even the players could look at Musiala's leg, so the ref literally sent them to the locker room. After the game, it was said that this injury will keep Musiala out for 4 or 5 months, meaning he misses half of the next season. But despite the pain, he didn't blame Donnarumma, saying, "There's no one to blame for this." But I guarantee that is not the case for tackle number 19, if tackle is even the right word, because this happened in the 2010 World Cup final between the Netherlands and Spain, and this game has been a bloodbath. And one man who helped seal that reputation is Nigel de Jong. His kung fu kick on Xabi Alonso's chest was so ferocious that the Spanish midfielder said, "All I felt was extreme pain in my chest, my body was shaking, and that it felt like my body had been torn apart and then not put back together properly." But somehow, after seeing this brutality, the referee only gave de Jong a yellow card, and back then, there was no VAR, meaning this just could not be checked and the game played on. Absolute insanity. But remember, these tackles only get more brutal from here. And at number 18, Ryan Shawcross almost ended this player's entire career. During a Premier League match between Stoke City and Arsenal over 15 years ago, Ryan Shawcross lunged into Aaron Ramsey, completely shattering his tibia and fibula bones, and this was such a bad challenge that one of the substitutes said he could even hear the bones crack. Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger said the tackle wasn't football, with this leaving Ramsey out for 9 months, but to be honest, he was lucky to even play football again. Ramsey didn't even want to talk to the Stoke defender or accept his apology, and later Shawcross suffered a leg break of his own, with Arsenal fans going as far to describe that as karma. Football was truly a different game back where these tackles just happened more often without the fear of VAR. But at number 17, it was actually VAR responsible for putting this player in a coma. On the 11th of May 2025, Nottingham Forest Anthony Elanga was so far offside, he might as well have been in the River Trent behind the stadium, but the lineswoman just didn't put her flag up, leaving the decision to VAR. Forest striker Taiwo Awoniyi sprinted into the box to get on the end of Elanga's cross, but instead, he slammed into the goalpost like a crashed test car hitting a brick wall. Awoniyi ruptured an intestine and could barely stand up, but to make matters even worse, a substitution error meant he had to play the last few minutes of the game with serious injuries. After the match, doctors said that this was in fact a life-threatening injury, and he had to be put into a coma while they did surgery to save his life. But incredibly, he was back in training just 2 months later. But seriously, somebody has to sort out this VAR rule because the next player might not be as lucky to live. Okay, we've seen player-on-player tackles, player-on-goalpost hits, but this one is a bit more unusual, but yet even more brutal than the others. In 1970, Brentford were playing Colchester when a dog ran onto the pitch chasing after the ball. Brentford's defenders decided to pass back to goalkeeper Chick Brody, and as Brody picked up the ball, the dog barreled into him, severely damaging his knee ligaments and effectively ending his professional career, as it wasn't long before he was forced to quit football and became a full-time London cab driver. But if getting injured by a dog is strange, what about getting injured by just a ball? Because this happened to Alan Smith after he switched from his hometown club of Leeds to their biggest rivals Manchester United. But the good times in red didn't last long, because during an FA Cup tie against Liverpool, Smith charged down a free kick by Liverpool's John Arnorisa, but that free kick was so powerful that the ball literally shattered his ankle and broke his leg. His teammates knew straight away that something was wrong, with Sir Alex Ferguson going as far to say that it was one of the worst I've ever seen. Smith was out for 7 months and nearly quit football, but he was never the same after this, with him still having pain in his ankle to this day. But so far, all these injuries have left these players struggling to walk, but this goalkeeper was left wondering whether he was in a dojo or a football pitch. This is Slavia Prague's Andrej Kolar, and back in 2021 during a Europa League match, Rangers striker Kemar Roof challenged for the ball with his leg so high he could have been a Taekwondo black belt, kicking Kolar and leaving the keeper with blood pouring down his face to the point he needed 10 stitches. Roof was sent off and was handed a 4-match ban, but the injury injury was worse than it appeared. The keeper watched the rest of the heated game with his teammates and even celebrated at the end of the match until a visit to the hospital later found that he had a fractured skull, making this more serious than he thought. The incident added fire to a game that saw allegations of racial abuse, red cards, and a punch-up outside the dressing rooms. And as for Roof, he had the audacity to appeal the 4-match ban, feeling it was too harsh for his Cobra Kai impression. Now, we're not even halfway through these tackles, but from here on out, they only get crazier. I'm talking career enders, double leg breaks, and nearly dying on the pitch. But for now, I have to tell you about Henrik Larsson, whose career was almost finished in a matter of seconds. You see, the forward tried to tackle a Lyon player during a UEFA Cup tie, but instead, he ended up clutching his leg in agony after suffering a nightmare injury that stunned the crowd into silence. The Swedish superstar had snapped his leg just above the ankle, and many thought his career would be over. But luckily for Larsson, it only kept him out of action for that season, and when he came back, he won the European Golden Shoe for most goals in a season before moving to Barcelona, where he won the Champions League, meaning despite that horrific injury, he managed to bounce back, something that cannot be said for some of the upcoming tackles. But for now, did you know that John Terry nearly died on the football pitch? You see, the Chelsea defender was never afraid of putting his body in harm's way, and during a cup final against Arsenal, he was accidentally kicked in the head by Abu Diaby, leaving him knocked unconscious. Terry swallowed his tongue, and if not for the quick thinking of Arsenal's physio, Terry would have died on the pitch. He was stretchered off and taken to hospital to have an emergency brain scan, but he wasn't bothered to wait for the results, so he just checked himself to go and celebrate with his teammates, taking a taxi back to the stadium in his full kit while still feeling dizzy. Reckless in recovery to say the least, but Paul Gascoigne was reckless too, so reckless in fact that it got him injured for an entire season. Roll back the clock to 1990 and Gazza was the talk of the town, fresh off the back of driving England to the World Cup semi-finals and even being ranked 4th in the Ballon d'Or. He was set to move to the bright lights of Serie A, but had one final game to play at Tottenham Hotspur, which was the 1991 FA Cup final. He was so excited for this game, he took Valium before to calm him down, but 2 minutes into the final against Forest, Gazza was anything but calm. He did a crazy chest-high tackle on Gary Parker, and somehow the ref didn't send him off, so Gascoigne carried on with his madness, and just over 10 minutes later, he launched a knee-high assault on Gary Charles, but in the ultimate twist of karma, Gazza ended up rupturing his own cruciate ligament, leaving him out for an entire season. To make matters even worse, during his recovery time, he injured his knee again whilst out partying in a nightclub, and these two incidents pretty much marked the rise and fall of Paul Gascoigne as a world-class player, as when he got his eventual move to Italy, he was unable to hit the heights he had done in England, marking a true shame to the talent left unfulfilled. But whilst Gazza still played out his career after the injury, Alpha Inge Haaland's career was ended on the spot, and all because he laughed at Roy Keane a few years before. This all began in 1997 when Manchester United's Roy Keane fouled Haaland but tore his own ACL in the process. Haaland thought he was faking and yelled at him to get up, and really, if there's any player in the world of football to not do that to, it's Roy Keane. Keane made a full recovery, but he did not forget. He held a grudge, and a few seasons later, he finally got the chance to get his revenge with a horror challenge that went down in the Premier League history books as Keane jumped into a knee-high lunge that sent Haaland flying. A straight red card for Keane, who then went over to Haaland and shouted at him to never accuse him of faking an injury again. That was the last time Haaland stepped onto a football pitch, as the injury was so bad he was forced into retirement. But at least Alfie's son has spent the past few years getting revenge at Old Trafford for him. But don't think all these Man City players are angels, because ex-player Ben Thatcher committed a foul so bad that the police had to be called in what has been labeled as the worst foul in the history of the Premier League. And it was Portsmouth Pedro Mendes who was the unlucky soul on the receiving end of this one. In an otherwise boring 0-0 draw, Mendes had just cleared the ball when Thatcher slammed into him, smashing his elbow against Mendes' jaw and sending him flying over the advertising boards. Mendes was knocked unconscious, needed urgent oxygen on the pitch, and was stretchered straight to hospital, even having a seizure. After some time, Mendes claimed that the foul wasn't just dangerous, it was downright illegal, and the Greater Manchester Police even launched an investigation into the tackle, but ultimately no charges were brought. But Manchester City took measures into their own hands by fining him for 6 weeks' wages, along with a ban from the FA. Luckily, Mendes, who was the victim from all this, was back playing soon afterward. But the same cannot be said for the next player on this list, because this injury marked his final day as a pro football. This happened near the end of the 95-96 season when Manchester United's goalkeeper Peter Schmeichel saved a header that fell right into the path of Coventry City's David Bust. But what looked like being an easy tap turned into a horror injury as United's Dennis Irwin and Brian McClare sandwiched the Coventry player, snapping his leg so badly that the blood had to be manually cleared from the pitch. Schmeichel even puked by the goal after seeing Bust's leg, and things would get even worse once Bust was rushed to the hospital as his wound got infected so badly that the doctors even considered amputation. Bust needed 22 operations over the course of 3 years, with pins inserted, pins removed, skin graft surgeries, and an all-round hell for the player. Premier League fans sent him more than 4,000 get-well-soon cards, but sadly, David Bust never played professional football again. And the same should have been said about Petr Cech, because his injury really could have ended his career on this spot in a hit that was so traumatic he can't even remember it. Cech was the goalkeeper for Chelsea at the time, and during a Premier League match he was smashed into by Reading's Stephen Hunt in what the commentators described as a bit of a knock. But that was a rather casual way to describe a near-death experience for the Chelsea goalkeeper, who fractured his skull so badly that he needed emergency surgery to save his life. The injury was so bad, it changed the sport as a whole, with referees now required to train for head injuries. And to make the situation worse, the ambulance was slow to get onto the pitch to rush him in for surgery, where parts of his skull had to be removed from his brain and a metal plate was inserted. He was told he would never play football again, but this is where a solution was found. 3 months later, Petr Cech returned to action with a helmet on, which he would wear for the rest of his career, and by the grace of God, he never had another head injury again. But unfortunately, this next player would never recover from their horrific leg injury, ending his career on his debut for his new club. This is Luc Nilis, and back in the 2000s, he was regarded as one of the best strikers in the world, as said by his ex-teammates Ronaldo Nazario and Ruud van Nistelrooy. So when he finally got his move to the Premier League, it was his chance to prove to the world he was truly a football great. But sometimes luck just isn't on your side, because on his Premier League debut for Aston Villa, he scored a goal, but not long after, he had a clash with Ipswich goalkeeper Richard Wright and suffered a double break of his leg, having to be rushed to hospital where he had several operations and had an aluminum nail inserted into his bone. The leg got infected and there were talks of amputation. Luckily, he kept his leg, but that was all he kept because his football career was ended on the spot, as the man still struggles to walk to this day. And speaking of traumatic leg breaks, you might want to look away for this next one, because this leg did a literal 180. Roll the clock back a few years to the Belgian Pro League, when Belgian star Axel Witsel dived into a heavy challenge against Anderlecht defender Marcin Wasilewski, except instead of getting the ball, he got the leg, which tragically snapped like a chopstick. This leg rotated so bad, it was one of the worst injuries in the history of the sport, leaving Wasilewski out for 9 months. Fans were so angry that Axel Witsel received death threats in this time period, but at least Marcin made a full recovery before making a move to the Premier League to join Leicester City for their incredible title-winning season, only for more bad luck to come his way, as he only played 4 games, meaning he wasn't eligible for a winner's medal. Damn, that's a tough few years. But now, speaking of Premier League titles, this next injury was so gruesome, it cost their team the title. This happened in February 2008, and Arsenal were steaming toward the Premier League title, helped by the incredible form of their star striker Eduardo da Silva. The Gunners were 5 points clear at the top of the league when they took on Birmingham City, but just 3 minutes into the game, disaster struck. Martin Taylor's reckless lunge caused Eduardo's ankle to suffer an open fracture dislocation, meaning his leg bone had burst through the skin, completely destroying his ankle. And this injury was so bad, he was taken to a specialist hospital unit in Birmingham that usually treats soldiers injured by landmines. He needed a metal plate and 5 pins inserted into his ankle and didn't play for an entire year. And the shock of the injury was so bad, with the loss of their talisman, which meant Arsenal suffered a shock loss of form, winning just 1 of their next 8 games and finishing the season in 3rd place, 4 points behind champions Manchester United. But believe it or not, that wasn't the worst injury Arsenal ever saw. But before that story, at number 2, this foul was so brutal that the French public literally voted the tackler to be worse than Hitler himself. This happened in the 1982 World Cup semi-final, where French player Patrick Battiston was through on goal, but after he shot, the German goalkeeper Schumacher just assaulted him. It didn't even look like he tried to get to the ball, as he leapt at him full speed ahead, smashing his hip so hard into Battiston's face that it put the man into a coma. He needed oxygen, damaged his back, cracked 3 ribs, and had some of his teeth knocked out from that one single tackle. French captain Michel Platini said he thought Battiston was dead as he was lying there on the pitch for a full 7 minutes before he was eventually stretchered off the pitch. But somehow, Schumacher acted like nothing had happened and even did keepy-uppies while waiting for Battiston to be stretchered away. The referee didn't see the incident, so he wasn't even booked. And after France lost the match on penalties, the French public were so outraged they hung effigies of Schumacher from lampposts and voted him as France's greatest ever enemy, even worse than Adolf Hitler himself. But now we finally made it to number 1, as Santi Cazorla suffered arguably the most brutal injury in the history of football. Now, when you look at the clip, you might think this is not as bad as injuries go, but I promise you, whilst it may not look bad, it certainly was a horrific experience. You see, back in 2016, Cazorla had been suffering from problems with his Achilles tendon for much of the season, and when he got a kick on his Achilles in a match for Arsenal against Ludogorets, everything went wrong. Cazorla didn't need 1 or 2 surgeries, but a total of 8 just for the doctors to tell him the wound was not healing. Things got worse when they found out this wound caused an infection which ate about 8 centimeters into his Achilles tendon. The antibiotics weren't working and the doctors were losing hope that Santi could even keep his leg at all. "If you walk again, you should be satisfied," they told him. His skin deteriorated so much that he even needed a skin graft from his arm, but this is when a miracle took place. The skin graft was taken from his arm where he had a tattoo of his daughter, and after 2 more surgeries, rounding it up to a total of 10, there was finally hope again. Although Santi Cazorla never played for Arsenal again, he incredibly made a comeback to the highest level, signing for Villarreal in La Liga before moving to Qatar and then to Oviedo, who were his boyhood club. And to make this even more magical, at the end of the 24-25 season, it was Santi Cazorla who scored the goals to take Real Oviedo back to La Liga for the first time in 24 years, meaning despite this horror injury, somehow he made a magical comeback to the beautiful game. Now, if you enjoyed this